Let's go back over to the Giants facility across the parking lot from MetLife Stadium and welcome in Kevin Abrams, the Vice President of Football Operations and Assistant General Manager of the New York Giants. Kevin, obviously it's been a whirlwind of an offseason. When you went into it, did you think that you guys would be as aggressive free agent-wise as you wound up being?
We did. I mean, that was our plan from the beginning. You know, we'd spoken to ownership weeks in advance of free agency and asked them, you know, to what extent we had to go ahead to be aggressive, and they gave us the green light. Said to treat it like any other season, even though we knew it wasn't anything like any other offseason, with cap being lower than it was the year before, and obviously being in a pandemic having the effect it did on our revenues last year. But we were given all the support we needed and then some, and you know, we'd obviously identified our targets and we were aggressive with our plan, and thankfully most of what we planned on doing we were able to accomplish.
Kevin, you were in a unique position because you had the top two defensive line free agents sitting in your living room, and you landed the top defensive lineman. If Leonard was on another team, how aggressive would you guys have been? Would you have been as aggressive as you've been with the rest of free agents in trying to land him if he were on another team as a free agent, or not in your house?
Would we have been as aggressive to go get Leonard specifically? He would have been our top free agent this year, yeah. I mean, we had him on our free agency board. We graded the entire league, and Leonard was the top guy on our free agency board. So we would have been, he would have been target number one for us.
You know, Kevin, obviously you went and addressed the wide receiver position with Kenny Golladay as the top guy, and then John Ross brings added competition and is an interesting guy to bring in. Talk about the Adoree Jackson situation and the way that unfolded for you guys.
Well, that was a bit unique because we didn't expect them to be on the market. So after weeks or months of preparing for free agency, we had our board set, we had our targets, we had you know, parameters of money assigned to each target so that we could figure out what bundles of players we might go to, knowing what our budget was. And then all of a sudden, Adoree Jackson became available. And that kind of caused, or not caused, but it required us to reevaluate what our plan was. Certain things changed for a number of reasons, so we just pivoted, and we'd always liked Adoree. We did some follow-up study, made some calls, got more information, and decided he needed to be target number two three after we had re-signed Leonard, signed Kenny, and then we decided, all right, let's go get Adoree.
Kevin, talk about the value proposition of, let's say, a draft that's deep with players at a position you may need, and then free agency. How are those discussions, how does that work with you guys when you say, okay, well, I got my free agency board set, and Dave says, well, here's what the draft looks like, and here's deep here. How do you guys reconcile what you should spend money on in terms of if it could be available in the draft and that value proposition?
Well, before we get to the offseason, obviously our college department is grading the country for the upcoming draft prospects. So by the time we get to being really knee-deep into our free agency preparations, we already have a preliminary sense of what our draft board's going to look like, what positions are deeper than others in the draft. And then once we have our free agency board set up, and then we'll share our personnel evaluations with their coaching staff. They'll look at the board, they'll come in with their own evaluations, and we'll identify where we have consensus because those are where we want to find our targets. But then when it comes to what assets in the veteran free agency, specifically that would be our cash and cap assets, what do we want to invest into certain areas if we know there are also opportunities to get players of quality at that same position in the draft, which obviously require using different assets. And then you balance, all right, we better spend using our money on positions that aren't as deep in the draft, and are we better using our draft capital on positions that aren't quite as deep in the free agency? What opportunities are out there in the free agency market? So it's a bit of a balancing act. You know, it's not a perfect science, but at least it gives you some guidelines as to where you want to allocate each set of assets.
Kevin, our friends over at the NFL offices, Howard Katz and Michael North, every year they throw out a zillion different schedule possibilities before they finally unveil the final one. With the uncertainty with the salary cap and so much in flux, how did you attack it? Did you have several different thresholds? All right, if it goes to here, here's what we can do. In other words, so you had a plan when you found out what the number was.
Certainly. I mean, we had a plan for, 12 months ago, or now almost 24 months ago. We, went into our 2020 offseason knowing what we expected 2021 to look like cap-wise, and obviously that changed dramatically due to the pandemic. That didn't provide a lot of certainty other than the cap wasn't going to go up, if at all, and might go down. So now we had to prepare for a flat cap, a slight decrease, a larger decrease. So we had probably 3 different scenarios that we were operating with. We're doing the same thing for 2022 because we don't know what that number is going to be yet, and there are a lot of variables that can still have a great impact on that. So you come up with multiple scenarios, you prepare for all 3, you make sure that every decision that we're making, everyone understands what the consequences are of today's decisions on all 3 of those scenarios, and as long as you're communicating and transparent so everyone knows, there's no surprises, and you can plan accordingly.
Kevin, obviously this event tonight is for our season ticket holders, so I've got a couple questions for you from season ticket holders. The first one comes from Seth Keisman, and here's the question. Most of us fans, and probably us in the media as well, have no idea what the salary cap really entails. Can you explain to us how you learned how to do this, and what do you think helped you along the way in your career?
Well, I was fortunate. I was doing some internships in the NFL. My last one was with the Washington Redskins as a scouting intern during training camp in 1998. And I happened to be on a call with someone from the league office who mentioned an internship at the Management Council, which handles the salary cap and the collective bargaining for the league on behalf of the owners. And they had an internship that was about to become available. It was recommended to me that I apply for it. I did. I think I was the only applicant because no one knew what the Management Council was all those years ago. So I got it by default, and the internship was fantastic. It taught me a lot. I'd never aspired to work specifically around the salary cap. I knew what it was. I was fascinated by it, as I was fascinated by everything team building and football operations. But it wouldn't have occurred to me to try and work in that area specifically, and then getting the opportunity to do that at the league office. What I wanted to do was get into a front office in any role in team building, and it gave me a specific skill set at a time where clubs were hiring people for the first time to work specifically on their salary caps. And so that experience made me kind of a unique candidate, more out of good fortune than anything else. And the Giants happened to need to fill the role for the first time, and I interviewed with Ernie, and was fortunate enough to get the position. But it was the Management Council under Peter Rucco, who is a great mentor of mine. There's the Bill Walsh coaching tree, there's the Ron Wolf front office tree, and then there's the Peter Rucco football executive tree. I mean, he's got people placed in probably half the teams in this league, and I was fortunate enough to spend some time with him at the Management Council, which was a big step for me to get to the Giants.
Next question comes from Rick Acosta. How much of a role do you play in making personnel decisions as an assistant GM? Is this a position that's a grooming position where learning what it takes to become a GM and eventually wind up having your own team to run?
Well, generally speaking at the Giants, I mean, we put a great emphasis on professional development. We'll do things like scout schools for people that work in non-scouting departments in our football operations. We'll run seminars on the salary cap. We'll educate everybody on what we do in our data and innovation department so that they know how to best take advantage of that department as a resource. And we want everyone to be familiar with all different departments within football operations. We feel like that kind of education leads to more collaboration and makes us better as a whole. Specifically, in my case, I was lucky when I first got to the Giants that soon after being in the building, Ernie allowed me or asked me to get involved in negotiations. He encouraged me to work with Dave Gettleman when he was our pro personnel director, and I was queuing up beta tapes for him and helping him to establish short lists for players and organize workouts. And then through those tapes I would queue up. Dave finally allowed me to sit in and watch over his shoulder as he watched players and told me what he was looking at, and asked me to do some film grading myself. And then Ernie also asked me to write or edit some director's reports on the college side, and then Jerry Reese, when he was the GM, asked me to go in the road a little bit, and it's just sort of grown over time that I've had a role in personnel. I'm very deferential to our personnel department. They do it all year round, all day, every day. I contribute when I can. I enjoy it, but I also know that I have other responsibilities that are my priority. But when I can contribute to the personnel department, it's a part that I really enjoy. And it's really good collaborating with our personnel people, just like, we try to foster a collaborative environment everywhere.
Kevin, first of all, we want to thank all the fans, season ticket holders' participation. All the questions are presented by Verizon. Kevin, we want to thank you for a couple minutes and sort of shedding some light into how it all kind of comes together when it comes to the dollars and cents of putting a football team together.
It was my pleasure. It's good to see you, Bob and Carl, and hello to everyone out there. We appreciate all the support of our season ticket holders, so it's been a pleasure to be here tonight.
Yep, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll see you in person sooner rather than later, and we can get back across the parking lot.